Hello you dirty potters, how are you today? Today I want to get something out of the way that I feel like I should have gotten out of the way quite some time ago. Many of you know that I have a playlist on my channel called Glaze Review. Glaze Review is where I take glazes off the shelf, I review them, I put them on white clay, on brown clay, on a couple different test styles. I play around with them a little bit just so that you guys can kind of know what you're getting into before you buy a glaze. The high majority of these glazes must be tested before you put them on an actual product. Granted, I kind of just ignore that rule whenever I'm testing them for you guys. But of course, many of these glazes, whether they come in a bottle or you made them yourself, have to be tested before you put them on real products. Otherwise, you're just wasting a lot of your hard work, because what if the glazes don't come out very well? So, many potters came up with these little tiles here that you can test glaze on. Can you guess what we call them? I'll give you 5 seconds. Time's up. We're called test tiles. Making little test tiles like this is basically how you get a sample of clay, whether it be redstone, porcelain, heavy grog clay, B mixed with grog, so on and so forth, whatever clay you want to use, and test how it's going to come out with a certain glaze. For example, this test tile right here is Weeping Plum from Amico. But of course, you would have to learn how to make these test tiles first, and that is what I'm going to show you today. To be fair, I did a video on this maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, but it was kind of weird, so I figured I'd redo it. Now before we get started, there's a couple things you're gonna need to know and need before we actually start this. Number one, you're gonna need to know how to center. This is a crucial part of making test tiles. Granted, if you're already making test tiles, you probably already know how to center on the wheel, but just in case there's anybody watching who really badly wants to make test tiles to test their glazes before they put them on real products, the way we're making them today, you should probably know how to center first. Number two, you don't exactly need it, but this process will be made much easier by having a bat and a couple of bat pins. This is basically just a fake top that you can put things on to where if you throw something, you can just very easily take it off. Many production potters use these, as making things off of the wheel is not their forte. And number three, if you're making these test tiles today in the fashion that we're going to be making them, I highly suggest you have one type of clay. I have far too many people use recycled clay and then be like, why didn't the glaze come out the last time it did? It's because you have recycled clay, and recycled clay is just like a mesh of a bunch of different other clays mixed together. So if you want breadstone or brown test tiles, I suggest you make brown clay ones. Or if you want white ones, make yourself a white one. Or if you want porcelain ones, go get yourself a ball of porcelain clay. So today I'm going to show you guys the easiest way that I know of to make test tiles on the wheel. Firstly, get your bat, make sure your bat pins are in there, and put your bat down. Secondly, get the clay that you're working with. Today we're going to be using redstone clay because I need some redstone test tiles. A large majority of the time whenever I show someone how to make these things and they end up doing them in their own home studio, they get like a giant ball of clay like this, and they put it down, they center it, and I completely understand that the giant ring that I will probably show you right here is gonna look like it's large, like it's a big circle, and it is. But the eye kind of tricks you into thinking that that's a lot more clay than you actually need. So I suggest getting maybe about 2 or 3 pounds at most. It kind of depends on how many test tiles you're going to make, but in my experience, making more is a little bit better than making less, seeing as you're going to use them in the future anyway. And it's not like they go old. First, center your clay. After your clay is centered, usually at this point we would dig in a little bit and make sure there's a little bit of space left at the bottom of our cylinder if we're making a regular pot. But this time we want a big old donut, big old round donut. So at this stage you're going to open up, but you're going to go all the way through until you touch either your bat or the wheel. Okay, cool, you opened up all the way, see? Now you guys know how you make a regular pot, right? You start pulling from this point, or you start evening out your clay and then pulling. Well, usually before those 2 steps, you kind of crunkle your hands in to make sure that you get all that clay a little bit even. But this time, you're not gonna stop. You're gonna take your fingers and just keep on pulling out until you reach right about here. Granted, if you have a smaller bit of clay, you're gonna stop right here, and if you have a larger bit of clay, well, you'll probably stop way over here. But for now, I have about 2.5 to 3 pounds, so I'll probably stop right about here. Potter tip. It helps a little bit to kind of flatten your clay as if you were pseudo making a plate before you do this, because otherwise the clay would detach from the wheel head or the bat itself. You want to spread it out a little bit. Make like a really big donut. If it were about this big and I just started to pull it, well, it's probably gonna fly everywhere. So kind of compress it down before you start. Neat. Now we have a big old donut here with a big old black hole right in the middle. Now we can start doing what we would normally do as potters, which is starting to pull the edges of the walls. The only difference is we don't have a bottom because we don't need a bottom. So we're just gonna start pulling normally now. Be very gentle when you start pulling with this part, because the part in which the clay is actually sticking to the bat is only yay big, right? It's only this much stuck. But with a regular pot, you have all this surface that the clay is stuck on. But you don't have that now, you just have this little tiny ring. So if it starts wobbling a little bit or giving you a little bit of trouble, release pressure, recompress it, and then start over again. From here, we can basically just start evening out our clay a tiny bit, or if you want, you can just start pulling the cylinder. It's up to you, really. But from here, you're just gonna raise the wall. From this point, you have a decision to make. These, as you can see, are kind of curved backwards a little bit. And when I put these in the kiln, or when they dry, they're gonna stay in this form. So I can do one of two things. I can either straighten them out a little bit by making them stand up a little bit taller, just like this, or I can keep them like that. Either way doesn't really matter, to be honest with you. I just prefer to have them curved back a tiny bit, because the high majority of the stuff that I make is curved, because I'm a potter, and I don't just make straight cylinders as product half the time. So I like to have kind of a more realistic textile. Look, my bowls are curved, and so I want my textiles to be curved too. It's not that hard. The second thing that you are definitely gonna want is some texture. At the moment, this is an extremely clean clay body. I'm not always gonna have clean product. When I throw, I leave finger lines, sometimes I leave trim marks, sometimes I put the texture in my cups and whatnot myself. But I don't want a clean textile every single time. So what most potters do is they either get their finger lines and they put it inside of their textiles, much like this, for a little bit of a realistic texture. You can put anything you want in there, it doesn't really matter, as long as there's some variation of unclean or texturized surface. Or what I usually do is I get my wooden knife right here, or I get my rib, or I get anything in the studio, to be honest with you, and I just make a couple of lines right here. I make one line here, and I make one line right here. Making these two lines are really helpful to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, now when the glaze runs over the textile, I get to see what it would look like on the inside of a textured surface, or at least something that breaks on the surface. So right here, right in between where the line starts and where the line ends, I get to see what would happen if it ran over something that was a little bit of a thinner clay body. For example, celadons will usually go clear or at least white when I do this. So this will be a great textile for celadons. Some glazes, if you put them in the grooves of something, will turn a little bit darker or even a whole different color when they go into the inlay or the grooves of some textures, and this will also mimic that. But if this was super smooth, you pretty much wouldn't be able to see any of that. And the third, and probably the most important reason I put these lines inside of my textiles, is that half of the time, when I end up cutting these off, I'll use this as 1 layer, 2 layers, and 3 layers, or vice versa, 1, 2, and 3 layers. I'll dip the textile, I'll only go up to about here, I'll dip it a second time, I'll go up to here, I'll dip it a third time, and I'll go up to right here. This makes sure that I see what happens to the textile when I put 1, 2, and 3 layers, or 3 coats of glaze on something. Those are the main 3 things that you're gonna use textiles for, other than using them on real product and finding that out simply through experience. You wanna see if the glaze or the color comes out on a certain clay body in the first place. You want to see what happens when it's on texture, and you also want to see what happens when you coat it 1, 2, or 3 different coats. And these textiles will take care of all 3 jobs. The last thing you have to do is just kind of clean out the inside a tiny bit by taking your sponge and just compressing it against the back wall of the textiles. This will make sure you get a nice clean surface, because remember, if you put this inside the bisque load and there's a bunch of little clay boogers and clay schmeggles on there, then they're probably gonna cut you. Okay, you're almost done now. You opened up the donut, you pulled the wall, you made little textures in here to see what the glaze can actually do on a texture like this. Now there's two things left to do and you're pretty much done. Now from this point, you have kind of an option. You can, number one, use your wire tool to do this next part, or number two, use your potter's knife. If you don't have any of those two, a simple pin tool will do just fine. But this part, you're basically gonna have to cut the clay and measure it a little bit. Get your potter's knife or whatever have you, and just start cutting into the clay body very carefully. A little potter tip here, when you're cutting, don't cut in and then try and take it back out. Cut in, let it hit the bottom of the wheel, and then pull out just like this, as if you were slicing a big slice of cake or something. Just cut into it like this, very gently, get all the way to the bottom, and just pull this knife out. You're gonna keep doing this all the way around. This is the point where you start to measure how big you want your textiles. If you want your textiles this big, you know, this super skinny textile right here, this big, you can do that. It's probably not gonna stand up very well inside your kiln, but you know, it's your kiln, your choice. I like to make them at least 1.5 to maybe 2 inches wide. And you're just gonna keep on doing this throughout the entire wheel.
That's quite big. Impressive.
And that's pretty much it. You're actually almost done. All you really have to do now, if you want to, you don't have to technically do this part. This is extra work here. You could take your wire tool, split it in between one of those cracks that you already made, spin the wheel, so that way you can unmarry it to the bat that you already have it on. But then you're gonna have to find the point at which you just entered one of those cracks and take it right back out the crack. There we go. Otherwise, there's a little bit of a chance of you just leaving it here to dry, and it'll dry completely. It'll become bone dry, but when you take it off, it might break. I don't think that's gonna be a problem for too many of you, seeing as you might make larger textiles like this. But if you make them smaller, like the ones I had before over here, these tiny little ones just like this, well, some of these might break off as you try and take them. Well, thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. I just wanted to show you guys how to make textiles super easy on the wheel. If you already have a wheel, or if you know how to center, this is super easy. All you have to do is kind of halfway make a plate, open it all the way up, pull a little donut cylinder with the end side being empty, and then you can make whatever texture you want. You can make little zigzags. I just choose to make 2 little lines, but you can basically make whatever texture you feel like making. But these are a necessary tool in testing your glazes if you start to make your glazes, especially if you start to make your glazes. You are definitely going to need these, and this is probably the easiest way to make textiles on the wheel that I know of. I've been doing this for about 6 or 7 years. Here we're doing it with redstone clay, but you can easily do it with porcelain and white clay as well. So make sure to organize them, because if you get like your porcelain clay mixed up with your white B-mix no grog clay, some people can't tell the difference, and you mix them up. But thank you guys for joining us today. I hope this helped you guys learn how to make your textiles. If you'd like to see any of my artwork, the links are always down below for your beautiful potter eyes to see. I hope you guys have a fantastic week, and I will see you Dirty Potters next week.